All right, so we're going to talk through how to connect to the MōVI and how to program it. We've gone through all the balancing step and all the mechanical setup of the MōVI is complete. I've got an Android tablet here. This is mostly what we use for tuning. You can also use a Mac laptop and a PC laptop. So to connect, you'll just click on connect and your MōVI will pop up in the Bluetooth dialog with a name similar to this, FFS-D476. That's the identifier for your MōVI. You can rename this in your mobile device if you want to a name that makes more sense. That's fine. So I'm going to connect to it. It's D476. That's the unique identifier for this MōVI. Okay, so connection established. That tells you have a good connection. You'll notice when you do get connected, these all turn green. Various data is updated, temperature, number of satellites you have, battery voltage. Has a little status window which tells you indications from the MōVI. On the left side we have status running, compass good. Radio LOS, that means loss of signal. We don't have a radio turned on right now. GPS no lock, we're in a warehouse, there's no GPS. Drive good, that's talking about the gimbal drive back here. And IMU good, so that's the sensor that's controlling the MōVI. We have three main windows at the top: configuration, terminal, chart. Terminal is just used for debugging. It's not used in normal practice. The chart shows various graphs, including attitude, general, motors, radio. So these show the raw live data, what's coming out of the MōVI on these four windows. So attitude, so this shows the orientation of the MōVI. It shows exactly what it's doing in the attitude sense as far as like where the camera's pointed, where it's pan, tilt, and rolled. And that graphs it live. It's just flowing across the screen. General gives you battery voltage, the amount of charge that you've used, your temperature, and your pressure. We use the pressure for sensing height and all kinds of advanced algorithms. Motors, this tells you your motor percentage. So right now you can see my tilt motor is plus or minus 1%, my roll motor is plus or minus 2%, and the pan motor looks like plus or minus 2%. So these tell you how hard the motors are working right now. So this thing's pretty well balanced. We're only at 1 to 2% on each motor, and it's an interesting way to check and see, double check your balances. You can actually look at the power that each motor is putting out as in terms of a percentage and see if it's well balanced. So going back to the configuration window, the most important tab here is the tuning. That's where we have access to the pan stiffness, roll stiffness, and tilt stiffness. We talked about the importance of running these as high as possible earlier. There's recommended settings as well as configurations that you can download on our website. I recommend you check those out, and if you're going to tune it yourself, the important thing is you want to run these values up as high as possible without introducing oscillation into the MōVI. And you'll need to, when you tune it, you'll need to be holding it in your hand, because the tuning that you'll achieve holding in your hand is a little bit different than in the stand. The majestic configuration, we can walk through that real quick. Pan smoothing, so this parameter puts more or less smoothing on the pan axis of majestic. So when you turn the handles, it's either more reactive or less reactive. The higher the number, the smoother it is. The lower the number, the more reactive and less smooth it is. The pan window, this is a value in degrees where you can move the handles and it won't react to that. So let's say you're shooting like an action sports, like a skiing shot, and you know that you're going to need to move around, but you don't want every little bump to show through in the pan axis. So you can set this setting to a wider window, and you'll be able to move the MōVI. So at a setting of 30, that means you can move the MōVI handles back and forth 30 degrees, and it won't react to any of that input. Once you get outside that 30 degrees, it'll start to follow your pan. So it's an interesting way to have perfect stabilization while you're doing action and chase shots, but still retain the ability to reframe. Tilt mode, you can select smooth lock or majestic angle. Smooth lock allows you to manually manipulate the angle of the camera and have it maintain that, which is in some instances like the one I just described, snowboarding or something like that, is what you want. You don't want it to follow every movement of the handles because you're moving about in such a way where you can't control it accurately or smoothly. Tilt smoothing is similar to pan smoothing. The higher the value, the more it smooths out when you're in tilt majestic. Tilt window, same thing as pan. It's the amount of movement that you can have on the handles before it starts to follow your tilt. Under the general field, we have Gimbal Application. If you're using it handheld, you want to leave this handheld. The only difference between these two, or what happens when you go into airborne versus handheld. On the dual operator remote, when you switch into the majestic window, or the majestic setting on the switch, if you are in airborne mode, that setting locks the landing gear and the gimbal in place for landing. So it won't be stabilizing the pan axis, it'll just be holding it still. Whereas majestic mode in handheld has the pan axis active and has the handles able to control it. And the reason for that is just we wanted a mode that was safe to take off and land with the helicopter. Roll trim, this allows you to trim out the roll based on, like let's say you mount your camera and because of the way your camera gets mounted, it's 1 degree off on roll. You can trim it in here and you can adjust it to be level. Usually you don't have to use too much of that, and you can also do this on the remote transmitter if you're using that. Pan trim, this is actually a new feature released with this firmware and forward. This allows you to trim the, well, it's not live right now because it's in majestic, but this allows you to trim the neutral point of the pan axis, and that's helpful sometimes with multi-rotor applications where you need to adjust based on, or actually it can be helpful on a jib or other mounting applications too, where you mount the MōVI and it's not pointing at its neutral point, it's not pointing in the direction you want it to. You can just pop in here, adjust this pan trim, and get it to point where you want it to. Max tilt and min tilt angle, these are clamps or limits that you can put on the tilt angle. It's helpful sometimes to protect lens from hitting things, or if you know that you don't want to look beyond straight vertical down, you can set that. Remote operator configuration. All these parameters apply to, they'll allow you to adjust the way that the remote operator feels when it controls the MōVI, so the remote controller. So pan joystick smoothing in much the same way that Majestic did. The higher, if we put a higher number on this, it increases the amount of ease in and ease out on the moves from the remote joystick. Expo, this provides exponential, so what that means in layman's terms is when you move the stick, it softens the feel around center. So when you're around the center of the stick and you do small movements, they'll be very, very soft. As you go further away from the center of the stick, it's an exponential curve, so they get faster and faster as you approach the limits. So we usually run that around 10%. You don't want to get too much expo or it starts to feel very nonlinear. The window, really what this means is it's the dead band in the center of the sticks. So there's potentiometers in the transmitter, and this takes a certain range of those potentiometers and says that within that range we won't command any pan or tilt. And that really has to do with the quality of the pots in the transmitter and if they're getting worn out over time. The default setting on this works pretty well. Same thing for tilt joystick smoothing as pan, just the higher the number, the smoother the ease in and ease out. But sometimes when you get that number too high, people feel that it loses some precision. Tilt joystick expo, same as above. Window, same as above. Pan tilt remote speed adjustment. The two options are independent or combined. We usually use independent because I find that it's nice to be able to adjust the max pan speed independently of the tilt speed, because typically those two are not linked together. But if you have an instance where you want the pan speed and the tilt speed to be linked together, you can select combined and you'll be able to adjust it with one dial. Remote controller config. All this pertains to the type of remote controller you're using. If you are an MR guy and you have an aftermarket system, you can adjust the mapping for your system. If you've bought the package from us, it's going to come set up exactly ready to go for the Spectrum. This mapping is all available on our website in case you want to download it and look at. So we have some new things in this firmware in the Expert tab. We have motion booting. What this does is if you're in a situation where you're not able to hold the system perfectly still to get it to boot up, you can turn motion booting on, and it changes our boot up and self-check algorithm a little bit to make it a little less stringent and to give you a better chance of booting up if you're on a boat or if you're in a car, you're moving in an airplane, what have you. It just relaxes the requirements for that booting, and it might take a little bit longer to average enough data to get a reliable boot, but it basically tries harder to boot up in extreme circumstances. Gyro filter, output filter, these filter the readings from the gyro and to the motors. It allows you to optimize the gain or the stiffness settings for the various cameras. We provide recommended settings of these and configurations on the website as well. shaky cam, pan, and tilt. These are new. So what these are doing is they're, as you move the MōVI around, they're taking a small amount of the acceleration data that's happening and they're turning that into a controlled camera movement. So the settings range from 0 to 100, and you're able to introduce a user-definable amount of camera shake based on the acceleration. So it's kind of a neat effect. If the smooth shot thing is a little too smooth for you, you can use this to introduce a little more camera shake into your shot. There's the connect field over here, which is just how you connect. And then in the system, we have update firmware. This is what you'll use for firmware update in the future as we roll out new features. Write settings. So whenever you change the settings and you want to save those settings so they're applicable for your next startup, you need to write them. Read settings. This is if you want to load, let's say, a configuration from our website or from a friend, whatever. Default settings, if you get the thing totally screwed up and you don't know what you've done, you can always just default settings. Restore factory calibration, same thing. It just sets it back to the factory cal exactly as it came from us. Reset controller, that simply just restarts the MōVI. Bind radio, that's if you have a Spectrum satellite connected to the MōVI and it's not bound, you can use that to bind the radio. Save settings, this allows you to set up a certain configuration, save that configuration, then you can, like let's say you're switching between 3 cameras regularly, you can set up settings for each one, save them, and then reload them. Same thing with load setting, it allows you to load them. So just like balancing the application, we've set it up to be pretty simple. There's 3 tabs and a variety of things. I recommend you just download the app, hook up to the MōVI, and then play with it, and you can get a good feel for the configuration, the chart, and how all the things interact. So it's important. I mean, this is an important part of the system to get good at. Is there's kind of the mechanical part of the system, and then there's the electrical part of the system. If you can get good at tuning on the fly, it'll allow you to change your camera package rapidly and really optimize the MōVI in any situation that you're shooting in, which will allow you to get excellent shots. So I just recommend spending some time and practicing it. Thanks.